can be a viewer?
Yeah, so just exposing more bullet stuff that we haven't exposed previously.
Yeah. No, not yet. No need. Not yet.
It's very
marketing Rob McKee and people are all down in for a group picture in the boardroom if you like.
It's done in like multiple levels because one of the key things about cloth is trying to discover the correct behavior for particular materials. So this isn't the geometry we use to actually simulate the cloth first.
So it's designed to break in certain pieces. So
Another
chunks
use
of it
for
break off.
cloth.
Yeah, it can be used for.
And there are restrictions on that. It has to fit into the memory of the video card. You can't render endorphins. It's replacing the traditional pipeline, but instead letting you say, like, you know what, I can get this shot approved at this resolution, maybe at 300, 400 bucks to use Pyro. So just to give you maybe a clear example of how easy it is to work with some of the again, see a result, see already, it's quite maybe like for hours.
So I'm working, I've got an architecture background from the University of Waterloo and a computer science background from the University of Waterloo because I've always liked art and science. So in this is like 1980, 81, 82, I'm working as a computer programmer with the Unix operating system. Nothing to do with art, although I done a little graphics art before. And all of a sudden this company called Omnibus Toronto hired a bunch of programmers to help with their write code for themselves because there was no 3D animation code that you could actually buy, and there was actually Silicon Graphics, the very first graphics company had just been founded, so they weren't even using graphics computers, they were using large mainframes computers at this company. So for a couple of years I was writing computer code, coming to SIGGRAPH, writing computer graphics code for Omnibus, and also became their animation director because of my art background, so I was directing commercials and network logos, and not doing as much of the hands-on, although I should have been using my software, but doing a little more of the direction. So we were both programmers and artists in the early days. In fact, a lot of people you speak with in those early days had to be both left and right-brained, if you like, and work in both be technical and artistic, and if they favored either, it was usually the technical aspect. So that was Omnibus Toronto that got very, very large in 1986. They bought Robert Abel and Associates, one of the other large companies at the time in digital productions, which did Last Starfighter on a Cray computer. So we actually had access to a Cray computer, it's a very large horsepower to render 3D animation. unfortunately, there was a paradigm shift, and SGI came out with a personal iris that was relatively inexpensive at the time, and Wavefront came out with software. We had our own, but now you had commercial software and a commercial graphics box, and there was a whole shift in the landscape, and unfortunately Omnibus wasn't able to recapitalize, and they went out of business in 1987. So I'm at Omnibus and on the street, and I love computer animation. And the nice thing, we didn't think so at the time, but Omnibus flew to Japan before they went out of business and sold software to Tokashinto Film Company, and which set up a division which asked to have the name Omnibus. So there is an Omnibus Japan, and then they flew to England and bought a company called Computer Effects. And so when they went out of business, there were actually two people using Prisms, which was the in-house name of the software at Omnibus, had been named by the president, John Penny, at Omnibus. So Prisms was the name of the software that he gave it. Now they don't own the software, the bank owns the software, or there's a receiver in bankruptcy, and we put in a bid for the software. Greg Hermanovic and myself, two of us said, we're going to do this, and I'm not an entrepreneur, but I wanted to be a computer animator more than anything and write code. So we bought the code from Omnibus and formed Side Effects Software and bought Prisms from Omnibus receiver, the bankruptcy and receiver, and that's how we started Side Effects Software. Yes. So Houdini obviously is very similar to Prisms with a souped-up interface, and Prisms was written in C and Houdini was C++, but essentially they're the same mindset in Prisms or Houdini, and people from Prisms could go into Houdini. But where that mindset came from was a couple places. We were working in production, and we're lazy, and we're programmers, and we're lazy. So when the client says make it thicker, we wrote a thing that whenever we had to do this again, we just had a little variable, and we could change that. So everything that we did once, we never wanted to do twice. So we broke down. And Unix is like this. You can take a Unix operation and send the output of this operation to this operation, and this operation to this operation. So, for instance, create some the listing of the directory, sort the listing of the directory, and only take the first three lines of the listing, and they each have variables. So that is the idea of being able to do everything that you want to do within that context. In this case, graphics context, like 3D text type with bevels and color. You want to be able to do that in a modular way. You can break that down into graphic steps. And we were very lazy, so we always created, anytime we did this, we never wanted to do it again. We didn't want to digitize this again. So take font libraries, create 3D sketches. I didn't want to keep tracing. This is what a lot of people do, a lot of tracing at that time especially. That's a very manual step, do one step. We were doing things over. Why? Because we had a director, or we knew there was going to be another client who wanted that same technique. So we created that kind of thinking, that procedural systems thinking. Also, my partner had worked a lot in audio and patch cords, so he always liked that you could put the output from one audio signal into the MIDI box of another into a synthesizer, and by doing that you had controls over everything. And that gave us a real-time thinking as well, like how can we make this faster, more not just procedural but interactive, as much as possible. So that kind of thinking kind of keeps permutating and coming back and back into the Houdini and the next level interface.
You probably want to focus on
Bill, I'll give you a quick on Bill. Bill came into the company, he's almost the most recent guy in the company, about a year and a half or something like that, or a couple of years now?
3 years.
Oh, wow. How I've shortened time in my old age. But Bill handles all our press and media, and so he wanted to come and see what kind of, and if he could follow up, then Bill's going to do that. But he has actually a great photography background. He loves doing that sort of stuff, and that's one of his both loves and career thing as well. But for us, he handles a lot of the press. the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Science that hands out the Visual Effects Awards are called the creative categories. There's also the same group hands out Technical Academy Awards. And those don't go to a film, those go to an invention or a device or an idea that advances the art of making motion pictures. So for instance, a camera the thing that can make camera lenses faster, hot air balloons that raise cameras up, or those are all eligible for technical academies. Software all of a sudden became eligible because the digital filmmaking process was enhanced by paint packages and compositing packages and 3D animation packages such as prisms. And when they were sort of doing those awards, there was a number of movies to that point, including Apollo 13, but not just Apollo 13, that had used our particle system and our procedural modeling approach in prisms to make movie effects. And so for the body of work, for the number of movies that have been used in, we were awarded in 1987, I believe it was, 92, with our first technical academy for prisms and the procedural particles in the procedural approach. That was our first. We also won one that was in 92, and 5 years later in 97, and then this year we won another technical academy for our rendering technologies, yes. So there's prisms and there's Houdini, and a lot of people ask why did we write Houdini, and there's sort of two reasons. Prisms were written in C, and we're kind of not taking advantage of, there was no C++ compilers, and we weren't taking advantage of the latest compilers and object-oriented techniques, but also the graphics was getting very fast, and we found that even though we had a procedural system, it didn't look like a procedural system. So now we could draw networks and nodes, so we wanted to have a very graphical look to the interface. So while we were doing these major changes, both the whole code base and to the graphical look and layout from a stack of buttons to a proper-looking network, we decided to give it a new name. So all the same concepts, but we're able to go a lot and give it new legs, and that's when Houdini was born. And it took a couple years before the people who were used Houdini, who loved the prisms, found everything they loved and couldn't actually go back to prisms, and they all got over. Because we're usually, with every major change, we're very, you talked about community, we're very empathetic to our current community. We never want to walk away from them. They reward us in many, many ways with their renewals of licenses, but also with their word of mouth and their marketing and the tutorials that they build out there in the marketplace. The last thing I'd like to say is that community, while we're also considered a very high-end package, by lowering the price recently, after a couple successful years, and releasing our store, or under the Orbital brand, where we invite the community to contribute all the best ideas of these smart 3D assets so that other people can share a lot quicker. So we are actually trying to improve and increase the community of Houdini users and not be seen as being only for very high-end technical people, because I don't believe that's true. I think through the changes we've made over the years, we are very accessible to 3D technology.
Yeah.
Well, there's two sort of misconceptions in Houdini. Because we focus on film and film used it largely for effects, everyone goes, well, Houdini is for effects, and then I already talked about the other misconception. Houdini is hard and for high-end people, and so I talked about that. But the effects one, it's not true. It's just those where we are very, very offer a lot of advantages for doing effects, but we're also a procedural modeling, a great lighting package, a great rendering package, a great compositing package, all bundled into the same thing. So it's actually quite a broad thing. There's been TV shows, character TV shows done with Houdini. There's been a major motion picture done with Houdini character animation. So it's been, all those components have been used, but as a company that doesn't control all its marketing, the masses control your messaging, we are knowing as an effects package. That's where our difference is. We're not embarrassed by that, but we always like to let people know that there's so much more to this package that it gets experienced. And our users know that, but the general populace doesn't know that, seem to know that yet. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Guys? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks a lot.